Starting up.
Starting up. Okay, fine. And I'll go back to the screen. Yes. Okay, so we'll start, and I'll briefly introduce Sarnath. So first of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining us for the 65th edition of IDC Talks, which is now called Design Talks. We have the pleasure of having Sarnath Banerjee with us today. By the way of introduction, I'll personalize it a bit. My first brush with Sarnath happened in early 2000. I was in this bookstore called Oxford Bookstore in Bangalore, and I was there with my family. We had bought a bunch of books, and I was at the billing counter, and there was this book, a book with a red cover, and it was Corridor. So I was looking through it, looked interesting. I didn't know whether to buy it or not. And the cashier there said, "Sir, I think you should buy this. This is an interesting one." And finally, I did buy it, and I must say, it really opened up a whole world for me. And I guess not only for me, but for a lot of people who are here, and for the world at large, I guess. So with that, let me now introduce you, Sarnath. You have written 5 graphic novels in the last 20 years. You have participated in many art shows, Kochi Biennale being one of them. A Billboard series during the London Olympics, which was called the Gallery, was a notable public commission for you. You teach in places like Vishwabharati and Princeton. You have been nominated fellow at MIT, India Foundation of Arts, and many others. With that brief introduction, Sarnath, over to you. Let me stop sharing my screen, and you can. Okay, where is that? Yes, Sarnath, over to
you. Thank you, Nimish. That was a very nice introduction, and very nice of you to organize this wonderful evening. And it's an extremely dull afternoon in Berlin. Although I can see a magnolia tree, which kind of gives slight joy in the backyard. But it's really nice to kind of have a whole gathering of people and sort of in this sort of gray afternoon. I'm also a little bit nervous because everybody is a professional and a practitioner and probably very good in their world. So I'm hoping that the conversation afterwards would be very enlightening for me as well, very enriching. I learn a lot from the interaction, and which is part of the joy of having this this presentation. Nimish and I had a very brief discussion about how to conduct it, and we thought that perhaps it would be nice for me to introduce a little bit of my work, because many of you might not be familiar with my approaches, methods, and what I do actually, or what I try to do. So a little sort of a quick run through my work, and in between, Nimish and I, there might be questions that might come up. We can also stop the presentation, like try to keep it as a chat, and you could ask what questions can be asked. And then after about half an hour or so, we kind of open it up and try to kind of discuss some of the finer points and why call it like the disquieting world of graphic novels, why call it the third eye, why call it like, uncanny? What are these words? Are these words just like sort of, placeholders, or do they actually have meaning? And where does all this sort of, where does this sort of visual storytelling fit into this sort of modern world of hyper digitalization, augmented reality, XR, whether it's still like sort of worth discovering or going deeper into this sort of world of visual storytelling, which is comics. I would be using comics and graphic novels interchangeably. So I think a lot of people spend a lot of energy trying to kind of decide or try to figure out the difference between the two. Basically, they're just the same thing. I have actually a presentation that I made because Nimish said that, where's your presentation? I actually never done presentation. Now that I've done it, I'm very proud of it. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's the first time I use Keynote. And I'm going to share my screen. And then I'm going to go through the presentation. And Nimish, you can stop me anytime or kind of intervene, interject, ask questions. So,
sure.
Okay, so entire screen. And there we go. So the word uncanny, which is in German, which means unheimlich, is something that is sort of based on, which has its uncanny has its nest built on normalness, absolute normalness, like home. And unheimlich is unhome-like, basically when there's a slight change in things that happens around that ordinariness, something, and if it happens within the realm of terror or horror, that is supposed to be uncanny. Now, what happens is in comics, we use pictures and words in ways which produces a meaning, a third meaning, which neither of them can actually produce by themselves. So often what happens, if you've got the right kind of characters and right kind of words and text and everything, the comics often sort of writes by itself, and the you don't really know the outcome of what you're going to write. Sometimes you might have a very well thought out story, you have very good drawings, you've got everything, but when you put it all together, it might just not work out. On the other hand, something which has come out purely without any such preparation can actually turn out to be comics that really holds you. So that way, it's more like sort of I would always often sort of to describe the creative process of writing comics, always use the music, the world of music composition, where sometimes you write a note and then you play that sort of write a series of notes and you play it and it doesn't work. And sometimes you just sort of, sometimes you don't play your harmonium and then you write it down and the notation does not look so good, but then it all works. So these are like sort of a strange world of comics where so I start with this image of Khizr, Hazrat Khizr, also in Sindh called Jhulelal, who appears in green, and he appears when you are not looking for him, and usually he appears next to a water body, and he travels on a fish, and he apparently, the legend goes that he had told Firdausi, he had actually guided Firdausi when he wrote Shahnama, and Shahnama I consider as one of the primary pedigree, like in comics, this big pedigree starts from Shahnama, which is a book of kings, which turns out as a book of legend and becomes a book of history, and the other way around. And it uses images, it uses text, it is illuminated text, and I often go back to Shahnama in explaining comics and teaching comics to others. So I'm just going to quickly go through the work. So the 5 books that Nimish had spoken about. Can you hear me, by the way, Nimish?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, wonderful. So the red book that Nimish is speaking of is Corridor, which is I'm just going to show you the books very quickly, and then we'll go and I'll just briefly reintroduce myself to those books, because I've kind of forgotten the context in which I wrote them. Corridor was written on a MacArthur Fellowship, which is basically the story line is that time it was multi-plots were very fashionable. I remember movies like 10, Shortcuts, Magnolia were all the rage, and I was that time a student at Goldsmiths College, and somehow I figured out that a multiplicity of experiences can be told through a center point, and the whole story is based around a secondhand bookstore in Connaught Place, and various characters. There are 5 characters who basically come to the bookstore. It's a used bookstore, and 5 different trajectories of stories actually come, and it's a meeting point. So there's someone who's like digital. I introduce a lot of the characters who I play with later in my life, like Digital Datta, who appear Zilek-like in most of my narratives, like my own wandering Jew, so to say. Then there's a character called Shintu who's looking for the ultimate aphrodisiacs. I actually researched aphrodisiacs, part of the project, not for personal reasons, or maybe also for personal reasons. So I know all about Sande ka Tel, and I would go to these places as a patient and explore into this sort of wonderful, magnificent world of aphrodisiacs and very charismatic people who would sell these aphrodisiacs. Then I wrote a book, Barnau's Wondrous Capers, which is on 18th century scandals of Calcutta. So it was a historical work, and much of my work is still around history, writing history and visualizing history. And Barnau's was the first of this attempt, where I used the stories of 18th century rumors, and I used the whole process of. Then these were both published by Penguin, and after that I wrote Harappa Files, which is just before Dr. Singh's liberalization had just about like started and taken speed, and the society was changing very quickly. So there's a vignettes of stories, and actually I thought that it was a fast-moving world. It was like a kind of the floating universe that was going to vanish in a few years, and it was a good idea to kind of quickly record whatever I was seeing around. And I've done about 42 essays in this book. They're interconnected, and they put together a sense of, I always thought of this as a book of images, like history of how we felt at that point of time. Because, photographs sometimes have all the information, but sometimes you don't remember actually in what circumstances the photograph was taken. But sometimes, comics actually can take you there. You actually start feeling what it was like that, afternoon where it feels like something's going to happen, but nothing is going to happen. Or, sort of, so the history of feelings or history of emotions, how you felt. Then I wrote All Quiet in Vikaspuri, which is, thereon I kind of changed my tactics a little bit about my narrative, how I write narratives. So this can be described as a children's book for adults, because I think imagination is one of the best ways to deal with society, to live in society, to understand, to make sense of the world, to ask complicated questions, to figure out answers to complicated questions. I think the world requires, I that time felt, requires imagination, and it is an imaginary, the whole story is set around an imaginary a dystopic world of Delhi and the water wars that are happening between neighborhoods of Delhi. It's actually a love story for Delhi also, because I wanted to also talk about all these neighborhoods. So All Quiet in Vikaspuri is also basically about the neighborhoods of Delhi. And then there's Doab Dil, which is basically a history, a book on walking, the whole idea of walking. And as you walk, the world expands around you, and things actually happen. The moment you step out of the house, you step into the world. And the book kind of, then thereon, explores different themes, the theme of gardens, the theme of suburbia, the theme of bibliotherapy, the theme of sentience and nature, and it's basically just a wander through a vast landscape, and it's called Doab Dil. Doab as in North Indian Doab, and Dil as in the Persian word for heart. So let's start with Doab Dil and go backwards. So this is, for example, the cover is that of a mountaineer, Nan Shepherd, who used to walk up to Cairngorms in Scotland, and every time she used to go to the mountains, it was like visiting an old friend. She was not a summiter. She never really wanted to scale a mountain. She would just visit it like visiting an old friend, or like a dog, as she described herself, that she would just sort of walk around the surface of the mountain and find a comfortable place and then sit down and have a cup of tea. And I thought that this actually sort of described the book. And it's a book of wanderings, and so that's why I used this as a cover. And it's got various stories and various sort of, people intermingling with each other. Lots of themes are explored. for example, it's also a book of encounters. So, for example, is sushi chef. I spent a certain amount of time in Japan right before writing the book, and this is about karade de oberu, which basically talks about how a form masters the practitioner rather than the other way around. So when an ukue painter is asked how long did it take to make that shunga painting, which is which you can see in the first panel, he said it basically took 20 minutes. Got assistance with brushes already dipped in ink held before his hand. It took him 20 minutes to make a painting like that. But when you ask him, he'd say it took him 17 years. Basically, 17 years of practice. They say that you have to string a bow for 14 years without actually ever putting an arrow in it. And when you actually shoot the arrow, it hits the bullseye just from stringing the bow. So this is some of the sort of, pop spirituality also the book kind of explores. This is a sushi chef who went through all these sort of training. The text is even very small for me, so I'm not going to read the text, but I'm just going to basically talk around the themes of these works. This is Digital Datta, who's a character based partly on Zelig. I'm talking about Woody Allen's film Zelig, of a character who finds himself in the middle of historical events, more as a subaltern than actually someone who affects history. And he is somewhere between that and somewhere between the wandering Jew who was cursed to walk the surface of Earth for the rest of until the very end. And he just appears in different situations, and as you can see, the Kizar as in Julelal also sort of appears every now and then. So writing 20 years of work means like it's revisiting a family. Family members appear here and there all the time. So you will have characters appearing like a. Unexpectedly and sometimes refusing to go. So that's where the uncanny. This is basically about him looking out of the window while his shadow is actually smoking a cigarette. So there's that, in Bengali we call it ga chomchome. There's sort of this eeriness in quality in most of the drawings. Again, this is Japan. So the story, the Doab Dil moves around various landscapes, and this is in Japan. And it says by late evening, even though the Yamanote line is still crowded, people breathe easy. At this hour, Tokyoites look calm and sleepy after a hectic day. Amidst the press of returning office goers sits the distinguished rurologist Shuki Nakawaya. Rurology is the study of murmurs. Therefore, his hearing is extremely sensitive. Basically, he just studies low-frequency things like a ladybird walking on a beach, or the sounds of millions bacteria fermenting the soya mulch in a soya sauce factory, and therefore understanding whether the fermenting is going on nicely or not. Because I was actually living in an island in Western Japan, which was known for its soya sauce factories, and this character who kind of studies murmurs, because soya, these tumblers, these wooden vats, make this sort of nice soft murmur of fermenting mulch. So I just go through some of these images. This is these are sort of characters who appear here and there. In the satellite town of Gurgaon, in a golf course surrounded by plush bungalows inhabited by the most prosperous drivers of Indian economy, a tense CEO is beating out his anxieties into the night. These little anxiety creatures will blend into the night air, enter homes through air conditioners, vent and torment dreams. They would disappear at dawn. The satellite town once again will become the poster boy of smart cities in a growing economy. So then there is the concept of the gardens, which continue. I don't want to read all of them, because then it'll take a lot of time. This is the famous walk in Noakhali between Bacha Khan and Gandhi after a spate of violence that happened just before 1947, I think 1946, and they walked around again in a peripatetic and in a horizontal way. It's not like Dandi where the walk is towards a particular direction. This is basically just wandering around various villages trying to give support and a sense of solidarity to people. Again, I used a lot of lyrics also. In the last chapter, I used some of the songs that I like, and I did a little bit of a desert island disc, which kind of put together the themes of this wondering, because the theme was what I was even exploring while I was writing the book. So it was never really clear to me what I was actually trying. Whether it's a book about reading, whether it's a book about walking, whether it's about gardens, whether it's about modern mythology. So I used a lot of music, like a playlist at the end, and illustrated them. There's a lot of the stories are also about First World War, where I using the word the book idea. I also actually explored the idea of how there were shelves and shelves of book about the plight of the soldier, the Indian soldier in World War I, that never got written. The only person you can think of is Kipps in English Patient, was a sapper, a Sikh sapper. Apart from that, it's just like one big silence of, and when you see a lot of cultural production around World War I, there's hardly ever mention about the Jawan, the one who went and fought. So through these themes, I've actually explored some other aspects of sort of historical themes around. So this is again Digital Datta in a forest in Western Japan, sitting under a face tree. As you can see, there are tiny faces in the. It's a insomniac. It's a sort of an essay on insomnia. Again, retired bankers who had gone and left banking and started growing carnivorous plants in Scotland. This is also part of the garden idea. In his poem, The Garden, Andrew Marvell talks about our tendency as humans to congratulate ourselves on growing what nature might grow anyway without our interference. How vain men themselves amaze to win the palm or oak or bays. Okay, then I'll just sort of quickly go through the next book, which is All Quiet in Vikaspuri, which I already told you. It's about like this sort of, this is again another character who appears again and again. He's a psychic plumber. His name is Girish. He's an industrial plumber of great talent. He is an intuitive plumber. Plumbing is very much part of my work. Plumbing and dentistry are the two kind of horses on which my carriage runs. And he appears in a very sort of, he has an important role to play in the narrative of All Quiet in Vikaspuri. This is how the book starts. Still a few hours before daybreak, one adult member from every family has to wake up at the small hours to fulfill their duties. Neighborhoods after neighborhoods, they fulfill the same function. They wake up groaning, burping, and farting, mutter Punjabi swear words, get dressed, swear some more, and then go out braving the cold. With shivering hands, they switch on the booster pump and return after an hour to switch it off. The sense of achievement lingers until the next morning, morning after morning after morning. So no early morning sex, mostly. So I've kind of, I've known these neighborhoods while I was growing up in Delhi, and the whole idea of water and how most of our lives are built around water. The book basically talks about water apartheid, how certain neighborhoods get certain amount of water and certain neighborhoods don't get water. It's about neighborhoods fighting against each other. It's about real estate people who want to buy distressed properties, mafias who have, it's about a mythical river. Saraswati, when I wrote this book, was still a mythical river. By now, I suppose it is not. A lot of the speculation part of this book has strangely become fact now, and probably scientific teams while we speak who are trying to kind of dig out Saraswati River. It is about Girish who goes down subterraneanly and tries to find the source of Saraswati River and bring back water into the city. And then all the houses that were sold as distressed property will be resold by this Rastogi, who's the guy who has actually started the water war. So it's a lot of kind of intrigues like that comes out. Starts off the book starts off in a small town like Bokaro or I don't know, Bhilai or Raurkela. It's a small public sector. It's a big public sector unit with its own housing, and how it is disinvested and And then slowly that whole neighborhood comes to, you just see the decay of the neighborhood, how it can become completely ramshackle in a few years. It's about waterborne criminals who've been banished on Middle Earth. So these little like yellow pockets are basically where they find themselves, different reasons, different origin, the crime. It's about fantasies of creating a moat around their houses and having like a barbican that comes out, like, building the houses like a barbican. Drawbridges come out, this sort of, security as vanity. The war, of course, where Battle of Kalkaji, as we call it, where one neighborhood is fighting another neighborhood. It's about optimism, optimism and short-termism, about how anything that is nasty and ugly can be covered with marble. And the policies around this sort of idea of short-term this thing. So it kind of follows that trajectory also. There are sort of visions of war that I have over the years developed from watching movies, I suppose. Just showing some images. Oh, and there's a central character who builds it all together, who tells the story, is basically this photographer who uses a hotshot camera and makes his own costume. And this war report is basically creates the central backbone of the book. So you have the Saving Private Aurora, a story of valor and eternal friendship. You have Bhatora, the siege of INA Market. That is Tora. Some of you may remember. Guns of Ghantaghar, how three sisters took control of something that was thought to be invincible. Then there is Chronicles of Narayana. Non-resident Narayanans return home from Canada, US, and the Gulf to fight Pitampura alongside their brothers. There's Justice Bipin Bose, the butcher of Safdarjung. Then the Green Pagris, a very, very dangerous group of very stylish warriors from Shalimar Bagh. Indraprastha Now. They're sort of small stories that happen around this theme of Girish trying to go and find this source of water, and all the sort of intrigues that are happening around the idea of water. So again, it's like and there's this Saraswati Sena, which looks like things that we find like, now in our current political spectrum. There is there are all these sort of, propaganda and things like that. Selfies. Okay. That's we can talk about it more as we progress. Then this corridor, which is I told you about, which we already spoke about. This was actually the work was very kacha, which is what embarrasses me, also makes me very happy, because it is almost like you remember your sort of baby steps into the world of comics and how you fashioned words and images together to create meaning. And it had that sort of rawness, which I am desperately trying to get back, but I think I've lost it somewhere down the line. The works have become much more finished, drawings have become slightly better. Storytelling has become more like crafty, but Corridor was written like straight from the heart, and therefore has so many mistakes, and somewhere down the line I've just sort of dealt with it and quite like it. This is Hande Katel, one of those Hakims that I've met during my research. The character has these characters continuously appear in my later works. This digital Datta in front of a Haveli in North Delhi. There are all sort of these Hakims moving around the narrative. There are some of these establishments don't exist anymore, but have got like strong history linked with these establishments, like thugs. I remember the cocktails. You had Manmohito, you had Ajitino. They were all named after like villains from Bollywood. And you could actually, it was weatherproof. It might be burning outside, and when you go inside, just like a peaceful little like island. And I had many afternoons there. So Volga does not exist anymore. So it's interesting that most of the geography of the book doesn't sort of has disappeared. Some more promotional. This is Gold Market. I've literally like chewed Delhi up and regurgitated it in this book. These are some of the drawings of from corridor. Early October, still an hour or so of peace and quiet before the mad rush of office goers flood the streets of Old Delhi. Nearby at Turkman Gate, a retired Tongawala eats breakfast with his horse. The elaborate breakfast rituals of Old Delhi is about to begin. The first prayers of the day will come alive on the loudspeakers. As of now, the Jama Masjid sits quietly at the edge of Meena Bazaar. North of the Daryaganj is altogether a different planet. Here, the immeasurably old rub shoulders with the very new. And then the story goes into, so there's a lot of atmosphere, there's a lot of city, there's a lot of actually written with a lot of love and longing, and therefore it also actually, without planning it, there are disquieting aspects of the book which I completely did not plan, and every time I read it, it all sort of comes back. I used all the popular culture that was available to me. Ideal Boy was not that time common. It was not really. Now, of course, it has become like, very much part of our visual culture, and it's been used that time a lot. But I was happy, I was lucky, I guess. I got to Ideal Boy fairly early on. Otherwise, I would not have used it, because right now it's kind of quite common to use these things. But yeah, so, and this is one of my Hakims who sells Sandika Tel. And all these sort of, the muhavras that used to float around the streets. Aaj lagao 1 inch lamba, kal lagao 2 inch lamba, parso lagao bijli ka khamba. I actually collected all these things. I was just the research of this book was just much more fun than actually write. The writing of the book was also very much fun. So I've used everything that was available to me, and it was very kacha, the work. Like later on, I mean, you can think of collage, Dadaist take, and all that. I mean, that time I was not thinking any of that. Just like whatever I got, I just cooked with whatever I got. Yeah, so no sex during constipation. This is all this all these instructions. Intercourse should take place 3 hours after meals. Take meals in time. Avoid tea, coffee, tobacco, and prostitution. And remember, the fall of the Roman Empire was because of syphilis. And so he was trying to treat someone of Shigrapatan, which is nightfall or premature ejaculation or something like that. Then the Harappa Files, which I already told you about a little bit, kind of little essays. They are like files. And this is the cycling plumber Girish, who again appears, and his only problem is he's just a bit narcissistic. He checks himself out in the mirror all the time. I talked about dentistry, and it's about how modern town planning can learn a lot about dentistry, about like having too many teeth in your on your this thing on your face. And this is also like science. A green scooter always comes at some point of time, and then that that within a few months that house is going to disappear. And this chapter was probably like when a building goes, the shadows remain, or something like that, which I think I nicked off from some Serbian writer who wrote about like how the shadows keep on lingering even after the building is gone. Bureaucracy, the delights of bureaucracy, which one has to embrace if you live in India for long enough. Now in Germany, I see the same kind of bureaucracy, but in German, which is actually even hardcore, like black belt. Since I also married a Pakistani person, and therefore the bureaucracy just never left my life. Until now, I'm still dealing with bureaucracy because I've got a half Pakistani child. Triangular files, where files like Bermuda Triangle, where files disappear, that sort of stuff. A lot of advertisements from before, because I thought like advertisement was a culmination of a kind of an imagination of a particular time. So we had a lot of admission that, and a lot of things that we'd grown up with, like whether your name is in the list or not. And people having enormous amount of knowledge about trivia in Calcutta. So like people knowing, so these sort of things constantly. This is the man who supposedly had commissioned these files, which are these reports of an India which is fast changing. Ministry of Hope. There's stories about like non-aligned movement. This is a conversation between Nasir and Che, where tired of working as a minister in Fidel's government, Che went to Africa to seek new adventures. He met up with his old friend Abdul Nasser for advice. And what Nasser told him basically is that Africa doesn't need any more Tarzan. And there's a whole story about how Che was his revolutionary fervor, because I've always been slightly suspicious over revolutionaries. So this was a little bit like it also had a lot of private entrepreneurships, pre-Google private entrepreneurships. So, for example, this gentleman who sells this calamine X in a local train. As a child, I remember taking local trains to visit cousins in neighboring towns. On one particular route, I often encountered an enterprising man selling indigenously manufactured ointments. The product Calamine X has a legendary reputation of healing eczema that appeared due to sweating in shirt in the hot airless compartment. Therefore, it wasn't a surprise that most daily commuters had used Calamine X at some point of their lives. The enterprising chemist often cited them as case histories. So, so there are all these sort of, people who I don't see anymore, small-time chemists or small-time entrepreneurs. They would always sort of be part of that world. There are also the precocious kids from our times. They're also there. I'll just go through that. There's residents' welfare associations and how they were like this sort of Taliban-like organizations which get the moral, the moral quality never slacked because of these gentlemen. There's industry, how, for example, this one is there are skills that one can improve upon in one's lifetime. It requires practice and perseverance. Occasionally, one might even achieve excellence, but there are skills that one can't acquire, no matter how hard one tries. Taimur Lung, horsemanship, Muhammad Ali's left hook, Rajnikant's stunt, Jitendra's badminton, and Pandey's backhand chop. And you see Gilbert and George on top, like sort of, clapping away. This is a telephone sanitizer. They had professions like that, and I actually wanted to, that time you want to become like, you wanted professions like that, which are neat and symmetrical, because he had this little box where he carried all his oils and stuff. And we don't have time to get into all these things. This is Barnow's Wondrous Capers, which is about the 18th century scandals. This is a 18th century Calcutta bird club. This is basically a bunch of Chersis who would like hang around in a haze of opium and marijuana and pretend to be birds, and that they all had a certain bird identity. There are stories about like it's modern Calcutta mixing with 18th century Calcutta, bits of Paris also in it, because the book was written while I was living there. And so this is, for example, Celestial Photo Studio, which only takes pictures of dead people, because of the great Hindu tradition of taking the picture of your grandfather just before he goes for cremation. And your grandfather never looked, he looks more alive than he ever had looked. So there's all these stories of that. FM2 cameras, that's the grandfather. I'm just taking one small chapter from a 250 pages book. Again, bureaucracy and the fellowship of the Babus, as we call it, office automation, which is a really fun thing to draw. I've always loved drawing office automation. There's so much life. Sometimes I feel they've got more life than actually people who work in the offices. So a lot of, because I mean, I've been to various these offices, and you can actually, the people there are less alive than the gadgets around them. The fax machine is very expressive, much more expressive than the upper division clerk sitting and around it. So this, I always found that very interesting. Yeah, these are some of the smaller kind of, different types of mythology. There was a Babu downstairs, like in Raj Bhavan, there was a fine for 100 rupees that time, and he would come to pee outside the governor house, but he would come every weekend to pee and pay that $100 as a defiance against the colonial world. So then there's the legendary duel that was between Philip Francis and Warren Hastings in this sort of trees, which are called, which are also these two trees also stand in dual position. They're called the Khuni Jurwas. It's still there in Dolgan. Well, the trees are not there, but the location is still there. Then there are all the mythologies about, like, how people would like die. The best way to die was while half submerged in the Ganges, while you take the names of 101 gods, but you would never die because cold water would revive you. So this process had to be done several times, and so all these kind of old Calcutta myths kind of come together. I'm jumping into some of my contemporary work, which is a column that I did for Mint newspaper. And again, encounters, again, trying to understand the contemporary world that is surrounding me. These are two friends from Brevon College in Calcutta, who are synthetic chemists, and they, after a lot of research, illegally taking reagents from the Calcutta University, comes up with these two things, chemicals. One is called Normalin, which is a lanolin-based cream, and sanguinol, which is an alcohol-based drink. So Normalin and sanguinol in combination helps you deal with the current society where Normalin normalizes, as it says, all the injustices, all the things that are around, all the anger around you, and sanguinol gives you that confidence which you lack to keep on arguing with whatever. This is, I just read it, it's easier. This is JP, who's a fantastic darn master. You can find JP most days at the dry cleaner shop in B Block Market. JP, a local legend, is considered to be the best darning master in South Delhi. JP has everything, thin wool, cashmere, etc. For JP, darning is an intricate art akin to healing. The tear has to be fixed from within. The stitches should be done from inside. So over time, it becomes part of the general fabric, like the healing of a wound after an operation. For JP, fixing something is not just about putting a slab of marble over a problem. And basically talks about how the nation needs more of a refu master than a chowkidar, because that time, if you remember, the chowkidar narrative was very powerful. That's him. Cosmetic lobotomy. So I don't really make straight political commentary because I just don't see the point of doing that. I mean, I personally can't even do it, but I do look at the contemporary world through a prism of unreal, or surreal, or whatever, something outside the real world. This is cosmetic lobotomy. Cosmetic lobotomy is a form of treatment that distinguishes the fine line between brainlessness and less brainness. It was developed by Bhopal-based Pandit Jamnalal Dwivedi. He combined homeopathy with Uncanny, pranayam with Ayurveda, and came up with Angarang Nirankaran, or cosmetic lobotomy. Pandit Dwivedi, an expert in ghabrahat, or panic, thinks that one doesn't really need a fully functioning brain to lead a happy life. Switching off parts of your brain is a path to happiness, and it involves no surgery. Then this is again someone who inherits a warehouse, a publishing company, a legal publishing company, and we wanted to clear the warehouse of the books. The old employee comes in, horrified employee comes in, says that you can't take those stacks of books out because part of the building, the structural integrity of the building depended on those books. And there are places like that in Asif Ali Road. My vigilantes, this is COVID time, and how suddenly all the retired ex-government officers and army people suddenly took up the job very seriously, and then parts of the fortresses that familiar places like Mayur Vihar and Patparganj would become, and how they would keep a nigrani over the neighborhood and make sure the moral of the neighborhood is, because it became a virtue to exclude yourself from regular life. Private loneliness of social media. This is about older people and their deep loneliness that these sort of constant looking at screens bring. Just going through some of the images, Cheetah or Gita. This is the nation of uncles, respect vertically, suspects horizontally, and scoffs downward. Basically asshole to anyone below them. That's there. This is the moral, this is a collaboration that I was doing with a historian about the moral underpinnings of the epidemic, because it seems that with every epidemic, including the plague, morality became like a very big thing. So monogamy, throwing away foreigners, bathhouses were closed down, and so you see that, you saw a bit of that also during COVID. Sleep, the final answer to capitalism. It's about just sleeping, and it's about the Japanese thing about like the trigonometry of social distancing. Again, during the COVID times, because this was when all this was happening at a. Oh, I think I've already actually passed my half an hour. That was quick. Nimish?
Yeah, I think time flew. So it
Yeah.
do you want so we can take
Very
questions
fast.
now. Yeah,
What
yeah,
I'll
or if
do
you
is
want to just
I'll just take about 10 minutes and just 5-10 minutes and just like go through the other types of
sure.
work, maybe the
Yeah,
London
let's
work.
take 5 minutes and then go
Yeah.
to questions. Yeah.
So I'll just go to the London work quickly, and then maybe wow, time just went very fast. So this is what the commission, the Gallery of Losers, which is what Nimish was talking about, is the commission that I had during the London Olympics. This is about like, because there was such a big narrative about losers, winners, that I just thought that the best thing to do is to, like judo, use that all that energy and put it into losers. The very onset of the race, Jimmy Sips conspiracy, have they raised the hurdles by an inch. Or sometimes in the middle of a jump, Ali Doranbe wonders whether perhaps he might just have chosen the wrong sport. And you can see these Roman rings in the background. Or so this is how they were displayed. So javelin thrower who got hit, long jumper who got hit by a javelin thrower. Then ping pong, table tennis guy. At match point, 3 concurrent thoughts go through Philip Gotta's head. A draft of air at the back of his neck, and the eerie, ever so fragile silence of an indoor stadium, and how the fuck does one spell eerie? E-A-R-I-E, E-E-R-I-E. Set match points. This is Ilya, who can pick up great weights, but only when nobody's looking, nobody's watching. This is Hassan Sardar. This is judo for justice. This is Takamura, who thinks that society needs to be thrown again and again till it actually gets till it straightens up. This is a boxer who basically enters the court thinking, how many more do I have to dodge before the final bell? And well, we'll take a break now from this, and I'll come back. I think this I got quite excited about this PowerPoint thing and put in a bit too much. Stop sharing.
Well, it is exciting for sure.
I had stopped sharing.
Yeah,
I don't know whether. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's good. That's good.
All right.
So we have a few questions, but before we get to that, yeah. So let me ask the first question, and then we'll go over to others. That we have some on the chat, and some that are coming. So in this world that we live in today, it seems to have become very easy to hate. It's like, you hate a community, you hate a nation, you hate a political party. It's so acceptable to make hate speeches and so on. So my question is, what is it like to see people from a neighboring enemy state as likable, lovable humans?
Oh, I have never actually had wrong person to ask a good question, but wrong person to ask that question, because I've always had a very fascinating time being in Karachi, because I was the damad. So I used to go to Karachi quite often. And Karachi is like a world unto itself. You walk around. My new book this first chapter starts off with walking in Sadr. And you see this sort of ancient world, from Peshawar, people coming, Pathans coming with kajal in their eyes and ajrak, and offloading chikus and sorry, plums and all that kind of things. And the city is spread out in the most amazing ways, and you sort of constantly see this sort of ancientness of Karachi. So I had actually, and some of my very close friends have always been from that part. Some like Mohammed Hanif, H.M. Naqvi, and I fundamentally there's no hostility from that side. Actually, there's almost like the reverse, because you would almost have problems trying to buy something. This is a romantic thing that they would hardly ever. Even New York, a Pakistani taxi driver would not take money from an Indian person usually. So there's that Desi vibe is very strong. And as you move around the world, you realize that how close you are to each other, jokes, humor, food, and so that hatred, that kind of hatred does not actually exist in my world. Also having a half Pakistani child, and also like, the literature, we are exposed to the literature and stuff like that. So it's not that. But the general question about hatred, as hatred being like what we move around hatred, I think again, this is this sort of, there's that tiny moment where we lose our imagination of our perspective of like seeing something from either with a sort of screen of humor or detachment or drollness, and we just sort of succumb into our basic form of like hatred. It's sort of kind of, low quality hatred, because that's something, it's also like more than hatred, it's also outrage. We seem to get outraged a lot. We live between like sort of being outraged and we also entitlement. And I think it's good for us because nobody else is going to correct it for us, and society is not going to correct itself. To ourselves, kind of at some point I realize that, and use whatever imagination, music, song, whatever it takes to kind of not succumb to that hatred. But it's almost impossible. I mean, I wake up in the morning, when I see outside, it looks like a documentary film from a newsreel from First World War movie. I'm filled with negative thoughts. It's just terrible to go through the first part of the day. It's just like worst forms of, from betrayal in romance to job to friendship, all those thoughts rushing in, and there's no strategy to come out of it except like keeping on trying, I guess.
No, but why do you say that? So like in the first part of the day when you go out, you're saying it's the landscape of Berlin, it's the weather of it, or are you referring to something else?
I mean, there's first of all that, I mean, my own personal outrage of being in a place which I find myself very artificially planted because of like having couldn't have lived in India, because 13 years back we had to come back because it was becoming quite impossible, not in terms of society but in terms of government to live in India. So that was the reason why I moved in. So I never really actually developed an organic relationship with Berlin, something that I'd done with London. And thereon, you're constantly exposed with the fact that there are all sort of negative parts of like, you need to constantly make yourself understood. The modernity is very different. It's a European modernity, which I don't relate to. You have to constantly reinvent the wheel, and the politics of brown politics, that's actually even worse, because it is a politics of identity. It is where you place yourself, whether you kind of, fall into a checklist of whether you're running away from some kind of dictator. I think the fact that, too factualized modernity always finds it's very hard for Central Europeans to accept that, okay, that nobody in Delhi wakes up feeling post-colonial. And, so these, what we have done to ourselves also as migrants is also, so all these thoughts, come, Nimish. But by afternoon, you start, you've had your several cups of teas, you've had your this thing, you put your child in school, you come back and there's a bit of a triumph every time you put your child into school successfully. And he goes inside, and then suddenly there's a sense of opening. So you realize at some point, it's a state of your mind. You might also be equally angry while living in India, because that's what I most of the time I think of. I should be in Delhi, I should be having jalebi, moti mahal, or moti sweets, but moti sweet does not make that good jalebis anymore. So, so,
okay, angur khatte hai.
Basically that's the thing. So I think at the end of the day, somewhere down the line, you yourself have to realize, you have to come to a kind of a Taoist kind of a philosophy, that it's all flux and you just have to on, like, putting one foot in front and try to enchant yourself. The whole idea is an enchantment project and how one can enchant oneself.
Sure, sure. Thank you. So, कुछ questions आ रहे हैं. There is one question from Nidhi. Nidhi says, when do you know a work is done and ready to be published?
बड़ा मुश्किल है. Very good question. And some of the best works come in the rawest form, which is in a notebook, in pencil, and then you start kind of processing it, and at some point you have to stop, and the work never gets completed. It gets finished. Meaning you have to decide, ये अभी हो गया, finish हो गया, और इसको आगे करता है. Because if you linger around the work, it does not necessarily improve it. Because I was telling you that uncanny forces that happens. The tune of Pyasa, that harmonium bridge, is not a work of thousands of years of like thinking and coming up, or strategically coming up with that kind of a tune. It just came from somewhere, God knows where, from armpit or something. But the tune just came, and it's almost haunting. You know what I'm talking about? That tune that every time there's an appearance of someone, that tune comes out. ये lightness and ये this light gesture that only comes to karate, I feel. Karate, जिसका बात अभी जिक्र अभी किया था, that 14 of string, the bow, and then you hope that Riyaz, and we're actually thinking that you're ever going to become the master of the form. You keep on giving stabs at it, and then at some point in time that lightness comes out. बहुत कम होता है, but जब होता है, you sort of somehow come to know of it. And in a full book, there might be only 2 or 3 occasions where you reach that point. But again, it's a work in progress, and you can't make things precious, because the moment you make it precious, it becomes heavy. It's like a light drone. You can't put too much payload on it. It will sink, but it's sophisticated in its lightness. So that framework is what I think I want to tell Vidhi, that it is that framework that is a constant struggle, and that is almost always elusive, like Julian. You never get to that point.
So there is a question, Sankalp, I'll come to you. There's a question that's here. This is from Pudi Ravi. What was the reaction to the billboards? And which of your works did you enjoy the most?
In the billboard, this thing, I like my guy, Tanikawa, who the same guy who thinks that you have to throw society again and again till it kind of straightens up. It came from me years back doing an interview with a judoka from Brazil in Saopaolo, in a small little 2-bedroom flat. It looked like a Patparganj flat outside Saopaolo, like a chota sa, like a housing cooperative, and he had a small SAS bag. I don't think you definitely, either you yourself or one of your uncles or mamas or this thing would have had these SAS bags, Scandinavian Airlines bag. They also had this Scandinavian Airlines bag, and I have a great appetite for objects. Moment you see this SAS bag, you think about like Srirampur or whatever, and from this bag, he brought out a bunch of papers in which he talked about a narrative description of his final fight in Los Angeles Olympics, where he was the favorite, and he defeated the Japanese champion. And the final round, he had to fight this Korean person. And the Korean person held him one. He was much stronger, and our man was an arboreal judoka. Means that he liked throwing people up, like tossing, mostly like being in the air. And this guy was more pastoral judo guy, so he liked pulling people down to the floor, and he won. So I asked him, how was it like losing? Getting there and losing to this Korean guy who didn't have any sophistication, just like brute force. And Douglas Riviera told me that come tomorrow, I'll show it to you. Come to my dojo and I'll show it to you. And my assistant egged me a little bit that what kind of a graphic reporter are you if you don't experience it yourself. So I also, that I was younger, so I went to his dojo, and he made me take my glasses off. It was all very ceremonial. I came to the dojo and he threw me 14 times. 14 different ways of throwing in judo. There are many different ways, but 14 different. This is a man whose face is the size of my torso. But Nimish, he obviously did not throw me. He would pick me up and he would drop me, because if he threw me, I would have been not doing either graphic novel or comics, even though there's no difference between the two. I was he would like pick me and he would drop me like a leaf at the end. And after about 10 such thing, you wanted more. You kind of get, when the pure joy of an adult man picking up another adult man and has some kind of a feel to it. So, so judo got me closer to some kind of a spiritual enlightenment, and I tried to replicate it many years later when I was doing this London project. And the losing part was I thought was there are many ways to lose, as the cliche says, and there's only one way to win. And winning suddenly became very vulgar, because the whole Nike's advertisement was all about winning, just win it, just do it. And I just found it very, very nice. Although my mother had a different take on it. She's clever that way. She said that you can do a series on winning, on losing, because you are not a loser technically. So you've appropriated. This is much before the calling out politics of appropriate kiya, isne wo kiya. So my mother actually calls me out every now and then. I said that tomorrow easy tha, you can write, you can wax eloquently about losing, because you are not a loser because you just got permission. Only 3 people got this.
Interesting, very interesting. Okay, Sankalp, your question.
Yeah, thanks. I had again the gallery of losers. I wanted to understand your thought process. How did you pick up the losses which you wanted to narrate through your work? Like, did you actually start looking for them, the iconic losses, or any such thing, or your people whom you had met by chance, and that is what you depicted? How did you pick them up?
Oh, very good question. First, though, I went through the research project, the big losses and all that, and it was just like becoming very artificial and very synthetic, because websites are full of it takes the magic out of our lives, and suddenly there are like all 10 big losses and Zola Bard and that Pierto, whatever, the Italian marathon runner and all that. Then I decided that let's just abandon all these things. It was also called Barwa Khilari. The Hindi version of it, there was a solo show. It was called Barwa Khilari, who comes, stretches, sits in the corner and plays Rubik Cube, waiting for his turn to come. I think I myself is a good because Calcutta, growing up, I'm not particularly good at anything, but being an Entu cutlet for everything was a great risk. I was personally, we had this at time, like these correspondent courses like ham radio, confidence in public speaking, radio, fixing your car, learning mountaineering. And mountaineering was like, I've read so much about mountaineering, never climbed a mountain ever in my life, but I knew everything, like Major Mallory's tactics about scale Everest, and I knew all about mountaineering, but never did anything like that. And whatever I did, I seemed to not improve. It's like my neighborhood, there's a Vietnamese florist in my neighborhood, and in my neighborhood it's like a para, like a Calcutta para kind of a South Calcutta para kind of a thing. It's got a square, and the square has got two cement table tennis boards. And from morning to evening, my Vietnamese guy, a florist, he plays ping pong with the whole neighborhood, the mohalle ka. And I'd moved in this neighborhood for 10 years, like 9 years back when my child was 1 year old. And I've been seeing him playing from morning till evening, every day. And I can swear to you, his game has not improved a single bit. And it gives me so much satisfaction. And I think he's like holding the torch for me, He's just like a continuous, the fact that you can keep on doing so much, but not, it's like, aap kitna bhi khao, weight gain nahi hoga. And I found that like absolutely fantastic, that I even tried boxing, and I got knocked out like within like a few seconds of my first boxing match, because for 6 months, all my coach told me is that no, don't do any strength exercise. Haath ko khali rakho, or keep it light. And I was across from me was this other guy who was smaller than me, and everything was wrong for him. His guards were down. His eyes were no footwork, because they said boxing is all about footwork you work on. So my footwork was perfect. My strategy was perfect. My positioning of my hands were perfect. And I thought that iske saath thoda khelenge. Fir finally jaake ek marenge mukka, fir, I'll do it sophisticated like a gentleman. I just got very close to him and like electric current. Something happened and I was on the floor. Luckily, before all these phone wala situations, so nobody recorded it. And I also tried to forget. All my life has been trying to forget it, and much of my work that has come out is forgetting that one punch that I got. So I was a very good material for myself for that.
Very, very inspirational, Sarnath. So अब लगता है मुझे भी गाना सीखना पड़ेगा. So after 5 years, I can say the same thing. So, but so I think
ICSE के बाद results were surprisingly good, so I did not expect. So all of us went to a Calcutta bar to drink and got really drunk, and the bartender told us कि पियो मगर इतना पियो कि गिरने का तमीज रहे. So I think गिरने का तमीज I'm like after.
Okay, so we actually are on borrowed time, but we'll take one last question. Anupama, your question.
Yeah, I put that question up. Thanks, Sarnath, for a fun talk. I think that you're very literary in your works, so all this is a big pose, and Sarnath is being unnecessarily self-deprecatory. Nobody buys this. And I really enjoyed the opening today with the Unheimlich, which is also very literary. So I was wondering, is this a kind of literary sensitivity? Sorry, I'm being rude. Is this a kind of literary sensitivity, or are you trained? Did you study literature? I've always enjoyed your books because they're actually quite sophisticated in the way they draw on allusions and intertextual references to other texts and so on. So, you're a naturally funny guy, and that comedy works great. But I also think that the works are really literary in the best possible sense of the term.
Oh, thank you very much. That is indeed a very nice thing to hear. Definitely, big bulk of inspiration has not come from the art world, but from the world of literature. Often Bengali literature, because we all grow up with a very strong, sort of steady diet of shishendus and who are like, the whole this Kishore Shahitya, which is it's not young adults, but it's neither for adults and neither for young people, and sort of create this world of imagination. And there are many characters, Telugu included, is part of that Kishore literature, where imagination, and also gemütlich, meaning warm and nice, and warmth and nice. It's not about like sort of, what the Western European people expect from Eastern European people, that it has to be edgy and strifeful, and the brown body has to be angry, and we all come from that sort of comfort world. It's a bit Bhadralok also, so one can call me out also because of that. It is about a warm world, and also then later on, like graduating Syed Mujtaba Ali, who's like this 1929, he lived in and wrote some of the most amazing writings around, where Germans are not thought of as like completely other. There was that extreme empathy, and I do feel like literature is our only last hope to kind of actually enter those spaces, into those lands, and also like sort of suspend ourselves from our own brain. Because only in Delhi I realized, when I moved to Delhi, I realized that people read for like for self improvement, because until then in Calcutta, reading is time waste, and that is where the reading comes from. That like your fish guy is also reading Anandamala, and everybody's reading. So like we all read, and I don't come from a kind of a family who reads literary newspapers. We just come reading like this kind of detective murder and stuff like that. So there's a strong Bengali literature foundation, which of course then graduated more like sort of Japanese, Chinese. I still read a lot of Chinese literature. The literary, but then comics actually works differently. It's not within the literary world, because there's been trying to claim it within the literary. So graphic novel is one of the ways in which to claim it. and the visual world has also tried to mimic. But it kind of actually suspended. It's not even Trishanku between the two. It is actually a world completely outside itself, I feel, increasingly now, because I find it difficult to talk to people who are still steeped into those sort of conservative landscapes. So I don't want to adhere to any of these words. I would much rather use musical references. Usme taal nahi tha. It's a tuneless comics. Usme beat dalo. I would not use cinematic words. I do think that a good comic should read like a nice Rishikesh Mukherjee story, where people don't get too much kind of embroiled in the form and stylization. It should still kind of be a good Manmohan Desai or whatever, that you got your basic narrative right, and then you can play around. But when it comes to comics, I'd rather have Bapi Lahiri as my my guru than Truffaut.
Okay, thank you.
So Sarnath, ye jo, the talk about comics and films and the parallels between them, I think we milke baithenge, so we'll talk more about these things.
Yeah.
And now we will bring this chat to a close.
Yeah, which is
And
why I thought it would have been nice to start it as a chat only. And chats are always much nicer.
No, so ऐसा है ना कि there has to be something left for the next time. थोड़ी सी प्यास रहनी चाहिए. So अभी सब खत्म नहीं करना है. So this was more of a taster, and we will again meet. So there are a few lines, so one particular thing that you said in the middle of a talk, if you have to experience the world, you have to go out and walk, and when you walk, things happen to you. So I think that is great. And even though in this world there is WhatsApp and there is chat GPT, but there is also this thing called walking and experiencing the world. So with that, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being here. Till we meet again, good night and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Stop
really.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll stop recording, and where is that? Stop recording. Stop.